Sabeen Perwaiz is president and CEO of Florida Nonprofit Alliance, where she strengthens, promotes, and advocates on behalf of Florida's nonprofit sector. She is joining me virtually to speak of the Alliance's work in supporting Central Florida nonprofits. Hello, tell us about yourself and the organization.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon. The Florida Nonprofit Alliance is the state's nonprofit association, and we are delighted to be here to do the work for Florida nonprofits. We are under the umbrella of the National Council of Nonprofits, so there are 45 other state associations across the country that are always looking to make sure that we are ensuring and paving the way for nonprofits to be able to do their job, fulfill their missions, and serve their clients without worrying about the policy or legislative landscape for their respective states and the DC area. Our goal for this organization specifically is to make sure that the advocacy and public policy climate ensures the availability for nonprofits to do their work, while also providing a benchmark around the research needs for the sector. So everything from economic impact, compensation survey, COVID impact on the sector, to really make sure we're providing real-time accurate information on how the sector is responding, what its needs are, and what its landscape includes, so that as partners, whether that includes elected officials like yourself or government partners, business partners, or other stakeholders, can plug in to see where the sector is and what its needs are.
How does the Florida Nonprofit Alliance support local nonprofits and the community?
So we, in one of two ways, we are a membership organization. So many of Central Florida nonprofits, including the United Way, the Food Bank, the Edith Bush Institute, Ability Housing, many of the members of your local community are our members. And so our members certainly get an additional level of support from us. They have member-only policy calls. They have member-only trainings available to them to really make sure that they know how to be advocates for themselves. And then for non-members, we were just in Central Florida on our Giving in Florida tour, where we partner with local partners like the Edith Bush Institute at Rollins College to make sure that they're getting the latest research available to them. So all of our research pieces are free and available to everyone on our website, flnonprofits.org. And so Central Florida nonprofits can leverage our latest research to see how they can leverage it for their grant proposals, their development asks. This latest research is really exciting because we are the only state in the country to have had done this household level analysis of why Floridians give, what areas they like to give to, and why they stop giving. And so it really allows us to look at, as we are in a changing life landscape in the middle of a pandemic, how do you cultivate donors and how do you meet our new demographics of the state? That was the other piece of that report that we shared with nonprofits in Orlando and across the state, is the giving landscape has shifted. Under 40 donors think differently, give differently compared to over 65. And then the high net worth donors think differently as well. So this one size fits all approach just doesn't work. And we want to make sure that we're empowering them with the tools and resources they need so that they can do their jobs even better.
And what are some examples of where our Florida nonprofits may need some legislative advocacy?
Yeah, so legislative advocacy, first and foremost, I love that you asked that question. Sometimes feels like something that nonprofits just need to stay as far away as possible from. And our advocacy trainings really look to highlight the difference between advocacy and lobbying, what legal lobbying entails and includes, so that nonprofits can do so while remaining compliant with the federal IRS guidelines. The PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program after COVID-19 hit, really galvanized nonprofits to speak up for themselves. One of the ways in which we saw this is, for example, when the Federal Protection Program came out, nonprofits were not included in that. It was going to for-profit entities. The state associations, along with our members, we created sign-up lists and make sure that nonprofits could speak up and say, no, we deserve this relief effort too. And as a result of that, nonprofits were included in the Paycheck Protection Program, which was a lifeline so many organizations needed. And if that didn't happen, many of them would no longer be here. On a similar note, the forgiveness for the Paycheck Protection Program also did not include nonprofits in the beginning. And so here you had nonprofits again speak up for themselves and be in that space where we often just steer clear of, to make sure that they're represented and their interests are shared so that they can also be included. So that's a high level on a DC level. In Tallahassee, we see it in many different ways, whether it's appropriations, whether it's working with state agencies on compliance issues, whether it's making sure that nonprofits have the same basic tax policies that are fair to, a for-profit entity. So an example on the state level would be a couple of years ago, there was a property tax appraiser that was really looking to find tax to nonprofits that were an arts venue, for example. Think of the Phillips arts facility in Orlando. If you rented out your facility for a wedding or an event, they said that revenue is not a nonprofit entity's revenue. That's a for-profit piece, and that should be taxed. The nonprofit went back and showed everything that said, no, we use these revenues to pay for our overhead and our administrative needs as an organization. We were able to work with that nonprofit and file a bill in Tallahassee that preserved property tax exemptions for nonprofits, which then affects all arts and cultural institutions that are nonprofits within our state. And so it's really those pieces, again, that a nonprofit would have no idea are taking place in our legislative space. But we want to make sure that we're doing that work, because everyone doesn't need a government affairs person or a lobbyist in their organization. But if they are our member, or if they're plugged into our newsletter, they can stay informed and be aware so that they can speak up for themselves, because we need them to be able to utilize that voice.
You spoke about lobbying versus advocacy for themselves. I have noticed that we get a lot of corporations and for-profit businesses coming to the county lobbying and asking for stuff, or lobbying for or against legislation that we're doing. But when there is an issue that is legislative that supports people and certain social policies and policies that help people, out of certain situations like poverty or whatever. And there's many nonprofits out there who provide services that are based on that topic. They don't come and speak on it. And why don't they come and advocate for the people that they are helping and representing? Is it because they don't want to get in trouble for lobbying? I mean, I've heard that they're actually afraid of getting defunded by that legislative body.
Yeah, I would say two things. First, many of them are not well versed in what the rules are. Many of them don't realize that you can lobby given the percentage threshold of their respective budget size. Many of them are also just very afraid of the political climate and environment where it's very divisive right now. And so they just feel like if they insert themselves in that space, they might be seen as taking a side. But nonprofits are not blue or red or purple. We serve everybody. And that's a tough piece. And so you really need to have the right trainings and awareness in order to enter that space. On the flip side, I would say that, the larger entities that do know it, they are familiar and they do show up, and they, or they end up becoming partners for governments to administer many of the social needs that the government is trying to meet. You have to have a certain level of capacity to be able to take on, a $2 million government contract, et cetera. And so you have, most nonprofits are small entities that are less than 500,000. Many of them don't even have that bandwidth and capacity to do so. The other piece of it also is those small nonprofits, because they're not plugged in and because they might be a little bit more afraid of entering that process, they get left out of that process because they just find out a little too late. And so another example of this, with the PPP loan, for example, many states received infrastructure dollars and PPP dollars for their respective municipalities. Those county governments or municipalities had the ability to figure out, okay, how do we want to utilize these nonprofit dollars? Some used a system where they partnered with their United Way or their community foundation. Others just picked the nonprofits that they knew. And so it's not always equitable. And actually, one great example to uplift from Central Florida is the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act dollars that were given in Central Florida. One of the infrastructure needs that was granted was given to EBI, the Edith Bush Institute at Rollins, to set up a capacity building program for small BIPOC-led nonprofits to really build up their infrastructure so that they're able to access this. But lobbying and advocacy often gets conflated, and in a hostile political environment, people feel like it's just better to avoid it. But then they eliminate so many resources that are necessary, and not just dollars, but also their voice in the process, so that the process is informed and actually meeting the needs of the clients, as opposed to those that have no relationships with the clients but are, top down directing what should be administered. And one of the things we always emphasize in our advocacy trainings is advocacy is the umbrella. Lobbying is just one piece that's under the umbrella, but it's so much more than just lobbying. There are so many things that you can speak up on without being, in violation or something that you need to track your lobbying hours. And that is one of the things that we hope and wish that more and more nonprofits would engage in the process and take those trainings so that they do engage. And especially with a recession coming up and a very, divisive political election season coming up, we want to make sure that nonprofits know those boundaries, and also just election season do's and don'ts. When to host a candidate versus, when to have only one side represented. It can get dicey, and you want to make sure that you're compliant at all times.
Yeah, I bring that up because, I've just seen in multiple occasions that there's no one really speaking up for the people. It's just the corporations showing up, and the people have jobs. They're trying to support their family. They don't have time, or they're not able to leave their jobs to come to a meeting and advocate for themselves. So the ones who they say they're advocating for them are the nonprofits, but they're not showing up and advocating for them where it's most important.
Yeah, one thing I will say there is, the next time that you know of a meeting like that coming up, Commissioner, please reach out to us and please tell us. One of the things that we love to do is reach out to our members and our partners in those respective regions where there is a vote coming up or there is a decision being made, so that they know. Because the other piece of it is, most nonprofit employees are such devoted doers. They go from one fire, one task to the next. They're always understaffed, under-resourced, meeting, twice as demands given the workforce shortage right now. And it just ends up being the priority list. Do you save the client in need, or do you, show up for a meeting that may or may not have a, consequential impact? And those are tough decisions, but flagging it helps so much. And then if that one agency can't, I promise you somebody else can. And so including them in the process, I think, is instrumental. And we're happy to help you with that, whether it's through our newsletter or member-only updates within the respective regions of the state, but we're happy to try to help with that.
You mentioned some of the research that you do to support the nonprofits. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I noticed when I started 6.5 years ago in this role was every sector has a basic underlying benchmark of their impact for the economy and why they deserve more resources or more partnerships or more collaborations, but the nonprofit sector here in Florida did not. And so one of my first tasks for myself was to figure out a way that we could talk about our return on investment, because we're often seen as a sector that is just taking or asking for money, but not necessarily sharing our impact. And so we did an economic impact study. We leveraged the collaborations with other state associations that had done something similar, and very quickly saw that our state's nonprofit sector is 6% of our state's economy. And that's not a small, chump change. In perspective, construction and manufacturing are roughly within 5 and 6.5%. So we're right in line with two industries that are highly respected and valued. We employ over 600,000 individuals in the state of Florida. So again, it matters very significantly for our state's economy. So what we did with that data was we have an economic impact data dashboard on our website, again, free of charge, where individuals can go under the research tab and pull up that dashboard, and they can filter it by their county. So they can look at it for Orange or, Martin, or whatever county is relevant to them, Osceola, and they can drill down those numbers of how many people are employed by the sector within that economy in that local region. They can also filter it down even further by subsectors. So if they wanted to look at arts versus health versus education, and then they can see, what is the asset per capita within each of those different subsectors. So if we're writing a grant application and they know that the environment is usually under-resourced compared to education, And they can say that, if we're looking at the priority areas for our organization, education is always funded more so than the environment, which is why the environment needs more help. So we're happy to provide that information that they can use, and they can download it from there. They can, do a PDF, whatever works for them. But we want them to be empowered with more information rather than having to commission and fund more research themselves, which they don't have to do. So we update that every 3 years. And we also work with the Florida Chamber to ensure that they are tracking that for us as well. So the Florida Chamber has a dashboard around, how Florida is doing. We were able to work with them to include charitable giving as part of that, as well as volunteerism, so that we are building relationships with the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector, and are getting more of them to see we need more volunteers, we need more people to give within the state. And we're able to provide landscape numbers from, our counterparts across the country. So everyone loves a little competition. And if we're low ranking, then it kind of motivates them to go, oh, okay, we need to do more. And our numbers are always going to be on the lower end simply because we're such a growing state. We're the third largest state in the country, and 1,000 new people are moving into our state per day, all across the state. So we want to make sure that we're educating those constituents as well into contributing back and connecting with the sector.
You just mentioned the Florida Chamber, which are corporations and also charitable giving and volunteerism. And I love our interviews. We've been talking about corporations getting involved in volunteering for nonprofits. How have you seen the relationship between corporations and nonprofits? Because I know, I think it was like a year or two ago, I saw Britain started bringing up this term corporate responsibility, and I brought that to the board, that idea of corporate responsibility and us asking corporations to do more, which has led to us having Disney and Universal Studios and our tourism industry now training their employees for upward mobility, for even better careers, even outside the tourism industry, and them being responsible for providing that support to their employees as an example of corporate responsibility. So what have you seen? How are things changing? Are things just getting better? Is there more partnerships?
Yeah, corporate social responsibility, or CSR, are rising. A lot of companies, we had the pleasure of speaking to the Florida Council of 100, which is 100 largest businesses in the state of Florida. And one of the pieces that came up was retention and engagement. We know that when employees are connected to the community, they're more likely to stay within the organization and with the community. And so organizations have models in which they give back to an organization with dollars. So for example, if you volunteer your time with a local nonprofit, the corporation will then match the dollar amount for that number of hours that you did and donate that to the charity. We also have examples in the state where if you donate to a charity, the corporation will double. So they will match it. And essentially, if you're giving $250, they'll also give $250. So the organization then gets $500. Oftentimes with those programs, the challenge becomes either the employees don't know, or they don't know where to go within the community to help with a nonprofit. And so with partners like the Chamber and the Florida Council of 100, we've been sharing our directory. So again, on the nonprofit economic impact dashboard, the last tab is a nonprofit directory. Any individual can look at, who are all the registered nonprofits within their local county, so that they have at least, it's not the easiest way, but they can see a big snapshot of who is present in their county so that they can connect with them, because we want more people to connect and engage rather than just keep going to the same high network donors over and over again. We know that volunteers also end up becoming donors, and we need to cultivate that relationship. On the state level, I will also say with Florida Chamber, for example, they are very much aligned. Part of their Florida 2030 framework included the philanthropy bucket. Tracking our volunteer hours and tracking our giving within the state is very important to them, and they're tracking it and also talking about it with their foundation to ensure that those numbers increase. And then lastly, for your region specifically, getting the Points of Light conference, moving into Central Florida now for 2 years, and they're coming back for a third, is a milestone. It's a national organization that specifically focuses on volunteerism and brings all these great national voices to Central Florida, and also uplifts the voices from Central Florida. So oftentimes it's just getting the word out and making it as simple and easy as possible for people to engage. And with the pandemic, we've seen, nonprofits that have been successful in getting volunteers are the ones who were able to pivot to offering online volunteering opportunities, not just a traditional come into my center and help me with X, Y, and Z tasks. And so as we continue, to figure out how to live with COVID-19, those organizations that have the time, bandwidth, and capacity to leverage technology to also engage donors and volunteers, and also leverage technology to make it easier for nonprofits to get those dollars. Many nonprofit donors have been saying, especially those under 40, they want to be able to give via text. They want to be able to Venmo a charity their gift. Compliance-wise, we're not there yet. We're working on it to meet them as fast as we can. But I think we also have to innovate as much as possible as well, because a lot has shifted in the last 3 years.
How can those in the community offer support to your organization and other nonprofits?
First and foremost, we would love for them to visit flnonprofits.org. If it's a funder or a donor, we would certainly be appreciative of their gift. If it's an individual that wants to connect or find a nonprofit locally within their community, we're happy to try to help them find their respective mission partner in those regions. And then lastly, I would just say, nonprofits love partners and relationships and stakeholders. And so if you just don't know where you fit within the landscape, just reach out, info@flnonprofits.org. We're happy to try to talk you through, what are the different opportunities and ways in which to engage. The research that I referenced earlier shows that ties and testimony are just as important as time, talent, and treasure. And so everybody is at different points, and we just want to make sure that we are meeting them where they are, so that we are all doing good for Floridians.
Are there any other ways that people can stay in touch and learn more?
Yeah, our newsletter would be the best, and then our website has our upcoming list of programs available. So if you are curious about advocacy or just want to learn more, you don't have to be a member. You can sign up. Costs are really appropriately priced. They're not more than $15 or $20. We want to make it as accessible as possible. And I promise you'll learn something new that you can implement for your organization.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, you too.
If you're enjoying this show, please subscribe to our channel and follow our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts.